Well, welcome everybody to ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. The title of tonight's presentation is The Fire of Purgation, given to us this evening by Dr. Ken Campos. I have a poem that I would like to read for you. Heat and etherealization. The action of the centripetal force is strong, and it keeps up together the particles of ice. It requires the action of centrifugal force, which is done by the supply of heat. If that piece of ice will be left in a cold place, it'll remain so until by accident sun's rays might penetrate there or in some such way that heat might be supplied. Just so then with man. The action of the centripetal force keeps us to our gross forms. And if we have to etherealize ourselves, we must supply the centrifugal force, which is our will. And this is the first principle of occultism. Just as the etherealization of our souls is the result of the action of our will, so is everything the result of something else. The action of the working of the circle of matter is regulated by the law of cause and effect. Nothing can be without it, and everything is at the same time in itself a cause and an effect. Take, for instance, heat. It is the cause of the melting of ice into water, and at the same time, it is the result of some other force. It did not come out of nothing. Then how can we etherealize ourselves? By studying the action of causes and effects and acting accordingly. Or, in other words, by obtaining knowledge of the forces of nature. In one word, by studying occultism. We give you Dr. Ken Campos.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Now let's trade. We'll trade laptops.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to share from my laptop.
Okay.
And usually I email this to Jonathan, but he's not here. Well, greetings, good afternoon. And thank you for joining on this Saturday afternoon. I have the great pleasure to talk about purification. And in a sense, baptism has been one very traditional aspect of purification. Let me go ahead and do a little share screening of a slide deck I created. And I'm going to hit play. Oh,
It was there for a moment.
It disappeared. And I hit play, it changed. There we go. All right. So the Aquarian Almanac calls it the Fire of Purgation. That's sort of an intimidating title. So on an advertising medium called Luma, Luma, I retitled it to The Dawning of Wisdom. And Jonathan here in the lodge talked about changing that. Let me say it's a Valentine's Day, February 14th. So happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And this is the wonderful graphic that Monica showed you a few moments ago with this quote from Hermes. Agni Yoga is the sacred science of baptism through the fires of self-purgation. And here's a quote from an article from Theosophy Trust from HPB. And it's kind of high and mighty, but well, I'll read it anyway. Make a difference between aether with an A and ether with an E. The former being divine, the latter physical and infernal. Ether with an E is the lowest of the septenate division of Akasha Pradana, primordial fire substance. Ether Akasha, with an A, is the fifth and sixth principle of the body of cosmos, thus corresponding to Buddhimanas in man. Ether with an E is its cosmic sediment mingling with the root race. It will develop fully only at the beginning of the fifth round. Ether is Akasha, that's the A, ether, in its higher aspect, and the E, ether Akasha, in its lowest. So again, here in Theosophy, we talk about the septenary nature of man and everything else in the world, man and nature. So here, she's talking about the fifth and sixth levels or principles of these septenary principles in the cosmos, and that for man, the fifth and sixth principle would be Buddhimanas. So that's what that's all about. So fires of purgation. So that's a funny word. What is purgation? So in Roman Catholic doctrine, purgation is the spiritual cleansing of a soul in purgatory. This is that idea that the Catholic doctrine is that you have one lifetime and you have one eternal soul, and after this lifetime ends, you might go to purgatory and do some cleansing, and then you can proceed on to heaven. Also, purgation means the purification or cleansing of something or someone. And historically, purgation is an act of clearing oneself by an oath or an ordeal, sort of like a renunciation and amends in a sense. But purgation is all about cleansing. And in the early quote, we had the word baptism. Also, the word Agni Yoga. So, what is this Agni? Agni is a word from the Vedas, and it's the name of a god, the god of fire, Agni Deva. He was the messenger of the gods, also very significant in the Rig Veda. The Sanskrit word Agni is physical fire, or it could be the digestive fires in the medical science in Hinduism of the Ayurveda. I'll mention a little bit about that in a moment. Agni is also one of the, as fire, the earth, air, fire, water, ether, it's one of the five fundamental elements of the universe. So Agni has a lot of different meanings. It could also be an inner spiritual flame, that aspiration, the movement of consciousness upward. That's our aspirational fires within us. Agni Yoga, as in the Hermes quote, could refer either to the modern version, and there's Agni Yoga Society. It was kind of called Neo-Theosophy. There are a couple of Russian authors who wrote about this. It was a mixture of ethics and psychology. They thought they were making an advancement on HPB's theosophical writings from the 1800s, there in 1920. And Jonathan was advising me that, yeah, that's not really the Agni Yoga we're talking about, even though there are modern Agni Yoga societies around the world. We really are referring back to the older version from the Rig Veda and the god of fire, Agni, and devotional aspects to him, the Agni Yoga. I actually say him or her. I'm not sure that god or goddess, but Agni is this deity. There also are in terms of purifications and cleansing, chemical purifications of metal. And the alchemists call this the great work or the magnum opus. It can involve the removal of impurities. And in alchemy, they used funny words in medieval Europe, calcination, distillation, sublimation, and amalgamation to purify a metal. So that's purely from the alchemical sort of early chemistry before the periodic table of elements, and again, part of our Western European intellectual heritage. Here's some modern smelting, which is modern metallurgy, where you heat up the metal and then you get the purified metal on the bottom, and then you have the slag on top as you're purifying ore. And this smelting could involve it usually involves high temperatures, like in that picture, a blast furnace, and you extract the base metal from the ore and you separate the impurities from the slag. There's another form of modern smelting that uses electricity, and that's electrolytic smelting. And here you use an electric current passed through the molten metal and ore mixed together, and it'll go to the cathode of the electrical circuit. There's a positive and negative circuit, and it's called reduction in chemistry, which is an odd, kind of almost a paradoxical word, because reduction in chemistry means you gain an electron, but that's called reduction. And oxidation is where you lose an electron in chemistry. So it was sort of in my college days, sort of weird things. And we talk about redox reactions for this reduction and oxidation in chemical things. And so anyway, that's the other form of cleansing. The baptismal cleansing that was mentioned in the Hermes quote at the beginning, the Agni Yoga, the baptismal by self-purification, has a very old history in Mesopotamia and then later on in the Hebrew culture. Here's something in modern Jordan in Israel, a baptismal area, and people do ceremonies there. This picture has no people in it, but I've seen other pictures on the internet. There's folks getting doused in the river. And something about um, baptism from HPV. Eastern wisdom teaches that spirit has to pass through the ordeal of incarnation and life. And before I read this, let me go back a second to this whole idea of the races and rounds and this obligatory pilgrimage, which starts in the globes as the human race goes through these different globes from a more etherealized spiritual form. And we have globe A, B, C, D. Now we're in D, the more material globe. And then we'll advance back up with wisdom and experience to globe G. And so we're in this idea of Eastern wisdom through the races and rounds and in this great cycle of life, the monadic journey. So this quote from HVB from an article she wrote called The Origin of Evil. Eastern wisdom teaches that spirit has to pass through the ordeal of incarnation and life and may be baptized with matter before it can reach experience and knowledge, after which only it receives the baptism of soul or self-consciousness, and it may return to its original condition of a god plus experience, ending with omniscience. In other words, it can return to the original state of the homogeneity of primordial essence only through the addition of the fruitage of karma, which alone is able to create an absolute conscious deity, removed but 1 degree from the absolute all. So in her own Blavatsky Victorian complex language, she is talking about this cycle going from the spiritual to the material and then back again through the globes in this idea that spirit, or the monad, passes through this ordeal of incarnation and life through these different globes. And now we're in globe D, the more physically manifested globe. Back to our Judeo-Christian roots here in America and Europe. Um, whether or not you were Christian or Catholic or Protestant or any of those things, we're still living in this culture. And so we can't help but having been aware of Jesus and how Jesus was baptized. And even our calendar, is based on AD years, the Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. So it's all very embedded in our culture, whether or not you grew up in a church. So this is a picture of part of the ceiling of a church in France, St. Jacques Church, and it was the baptism of Jesus. And here, the purpose of this baptism was slightly different than the one of the mikvah, which we saw in that other picture with the greenish river in Israel. So in this baptism, Jesus is submitting himself to his Father's will. Excuse me, to be more identified with that and to be in alignment with that higher, you might say that higher impulse or that higher will. And then in the more traditional and more ancient Hebrew mikvah, the purification was for spiritual purity and for repentance. Sometimes women would do this after giving childbirth, and people would use it at different times of their life in the mikvah. And in a sense, it represented rebirth. So both the Christian and Roman Catholic baptism is kind of a rebirth, and people talk about being born again. And this is a fascinating idea, and clearly it has been around for thousands and thousands of years. In the Roman Empire days, before Jesus and the Common Era, which is the other way of saying AD or Anno Domini, people call it the CE, the Common Era. So around 250 BCE, before the Common Era, Rome was having the Romans and the Roman Empire were having a battle, and they adopted a goddess from Turkey area, Anatolia, and that was Cybele. She was a Magna Mater, the fertility goddess, the Great Mother, and protector and guardian of Rome. Later on, around 150, um, kind of at the same time the early Christian movement was getting started, for those first 150 years, um, the Romans came up with a new ritual, as in the cult of Cybele, this Roman goddess, which involves standing in a pit. And this is a drawing from the 1890s from an old book. You stand in a pit underneath a wooden platform that has holes in it, and on top of the platform, some officiants and priests or acolytes would sacrifice a bull, and you would get drenched in bull blood. And indeed, I think in modern Christianity, we now switch the bull to the lamb, referring to the Lamb of Jesus, and are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Going back to this renatus in aeternum, which for the Romans was a phrase associated with this cult of Cybele, the being reborn in eternity. So the idea of rebirth and being baptized or washed with something has been around for a long time. Even in the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, there was the idea of a baptism as well. And this has a funny new word in my vocabulary, the tarobolium, name of that Roman ritual. In the alchemical days, going back to alchemy for a moment, someone near and dear to me is Paracelsus, and there's this apocryphal, maybe historical, perhaps um, heroic-like character named Solomon Trismusin, who wrote a book called Splendor Solis, and it's heavily illustrated with these medieval type manuscripts. This is one of his drawings from that book. They're ascribed to Solomon Trismusin. Of course, it's hard to know who really made these drawings, but it's ascribed to him. And the book is called Splendor Solis, or The Splendor of the Sun, and this is an alchemical bath. So the whole idea of purifications and baptism in some way, shape, or form is very significant. Now, the title for today was called The Fires of Purgation. And as Monica read to us about heat and a fire, I wanted to show a picture of a candle and then talk about candles for a little bit, since we're talking about fire and a really easy, commonly experienced kind of flame in our day-to-day life, as opposed to campfires or other kinds of bonfires. Is just a regular old candle in your house. And now there's even electric candles. But sticking with the wax candle, let me delve into that for just a few moments, because it, for me, forms an analogy. And a lot of our theosophical writing and thinking and studying involves what's called inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, and also using analogies and correspondences. So this idea of a purification is very much analogous to a candle. So what about candles? So this may seem silly to delve into it, but it's an important analogy, I believe. So typically a candle, when it's unlit, is just this cold, solid wax. And wax is made out of hydrocarbons, very simple chemistry, just a lot of carbons in a line and hydrogen stuck on them, and different lengths. And there's, simple hydrocarbons you see at the 7-Eleven, the propane, that's a really short chain. But these are really long chain, like 12, 15 carbons. And they're different sizes in wax, and they get kind of tangled up with each other. And at room temperature, they're solid. So we have this solid wax thing made of these basic hydrocarbons, which, like in propane and even in our gasoline too, in our cars, they're just hydrocarbons, which can break down and burn and give us a lot of energy to drive our car, to do whatever. In this case, it's the flame. So in the candle, there's a wick, usually made of cotton, that's set in the middle of the candle, and then you light the wick, and the cotton burns a little bit, but not a lot, but it mostly burns a little bit, and it melts the wax. So now we've moved from this collection of solid wax to now liquid wax. In its liquid form, now, as you may know, many liquid things, when you put a cloth on them, like a dishcloth or a piece of clothing or something, the liquid will soak its way up into the cloth. So that's what happens in the wick. So the cotton wick soaks up the liquid wax. And then with the heat of that cotton burning, the wax then goes from solid to liquid. Now it's a vapor. So we're going through different transitional states of matter. And this is analogous to, I would say, the transitional states of our aspiration and our baptism and our purification. So with the heat, the wax becomes a vapor, and the hydrocarbon chains are now in the air around the wick. Well, and this vaporized wax in the wear around the cotton wick combusts, and it will then burn. And this is now the flame part. And in that flame, the hydrocarbons break down into CO2 and water. And in that process, they generate light, the flame that we see, and heat, the candle flame. So it's actually a multi-step chemical process. And in my college days, I got really deeply into chemistry, so that's why I thought I'd mention this. But for me, it's now an analogy. And then if you do other tricky things with your candle, like if you have a spoon or some metal thing over the candle close to the flame, it'll get black. And the black is, well, what's this black stuff? It's really soot, which is some of these hydrocarbons uh, that really are uncombusted. So the carbons that are in the air, the vaporized hydrocarbons in the air around the wick that are not burned, and they'll just collect on the spoon or whatever thing you have over the flame as black soot. And it's very much like these are common experiences in everyday life. Chimney sweeps would do that with the black soot inside the fireplace because the wood doesn't burn completely. And in our car, you might see a car with gray or black smoke coming out of the car or the truck, and that's just the uncombusted gasoline. And a lot of times it's not even to that level of black or gray. You just kind of smell it. I know I'm certainly very much aware of the uncombusted hydrocarbons of other cars when I'm driving it. I got to keep the windows up. And the other thing you can do, which is kind of weirdly fascinating, is that if you take your spoon over the flame and you put it really close to the wick, and then take it away, the cool spoon will collect some of these hydrocarbons and you take it away, and it'll look white. It'll be the full-on long chain hydrocarbons. It'll turn back to wax again, solid wax. So we have this analogy of this aspirational combustion, and then when you extinguish the flame, you stop the combustion process in the air around the wick, you stop the fire, the flame, and you stop the heat, and then the wax, liquid wax, is all that's left, and it cools down and becomes solid again. So here's another diagram of that. You got the solid wax, the 500 degrees centigrade from the cotton thing burning, and that creates the wax vapor. And then around the wick and above the wick, this wax vapor combusts, and that gives us the flame in that little flame shape. And it's just a fascinating experience. And I was mentioning analogy and correspondence in our sort of theosophical way of thinking. So this everyday candle with its cotton wick and the solid wax is an analogous to this idea of motion, change, transformation, kind of like those alchemical transformations. And it maybe it's a bit of a stretch in my mind, but just wanted to present this to you all, that the solid wax could represent the materialized physical form of manifested reality called Prakriti, and that's the ever-changing dynamic material nature. And people talk about in Hinduism, samsara and Maya, that sort of thing, that it's impermanent and kind of almost imaginary, but I think imaginary isn't quite right. And on the wall here we have a diagram mentioning Adi Shankara, and he really said, no, this temporary thing really is real. It's not imaginary. And so Prakriti is this ever-changing nature. It's just transient. It's not permanent. And that's the Prakriti part. And the gas vapor, because it's more etherealized, because it's not solid anymore, kind of analogous to spirit, or maybe it's just higher manas, but in that direction, and that'd be Purusha. So we have these two words in our theosophical teaching of Prakriti and Purusha, of the witness consciousness, this ethereal spirit, and then nature. And that's a duality, you might say, that in the logoic emanations that we come up with this from the one thing, then it splits into two, and we have spirit and matter that are in this dynamic play back and forth in reality, but then also in us as individuals. And so the solid wax is composed of various lengths of these long chain hydrocarbons, which burn and oxidize to produce the heat and water and carbon dioxide. And it's a dynamic process. And so, what's all this? What does this have to do with us as people? So the theosophy world, with its sevenfold principles, we talk about our physical body, our manifested physical body, mind, consciousness, personality, using the Sanskrit words of the Shula Sarira. And in different theosophical books, you'll see the 7 things. We have the Shula Sarira, the prana, or jiva, and then we have the kama, and then the levels of manas, lower manas, higher manas, buddhi, and atman. So the Shula Sarira is this, I'm sorry, the Linga Shura, that's kind of the astral form of our body. Forgot about that one. That's close to the Shula Sarira. And people talk about the lower 4 as the lower quaternary. The Shula Sarira, the Linga Shura, the prana, and the kama. And that's our temporary body that we incarnate in. So this Shula Sarira is this materialized physical body, or our vehicle, and it's akin to the solid wax. That's my analogy here. Or Prakriti, the impermanent, ever-changing human body. And indeed, we do change all the time. You see it on YouTube, pictures of a little kid, and he's a little boy, and he's a teenager, and he's a young man, he's an old man. And, our skeletal structure actually changes, and our physical body changes. It's kind of amazing. So there's a transient process going on, sort of like the process of a candle burning, which is very much a process. So the cotton wick is like the path. That's our aspirational urges and desires. We want to go up the cotton wick. So we want to go towards the path. And that purification has some simple things. There was a guy, a lecturer, a PhD on the TSA, the Theosophical Society in America, on their YouTube channel, talking about purification from Blavatsky, saying it's avoiding pollutants, and avoiding toxins, avoiding bad thoughts, etc., or maladaptive thoughts, and then pursuing virtues of various sorts. And then the wick, soaking up the liquid, is like that link between, it's a bridge between the lower manas and the higher manas, called the ataskarana, or, and also going from Sanskrit to English is like, okay, it's kind of tricky. Some write it as antakarana, and it's a bridge from the lower manas to the higher manas. So some say that our mind part, our monastic principle of us as humans, has a lower and a higher aspect. Some might call it kama manas, and then the upper level of the higher could be buddhi manas. And so the Ataskarana, this bridge, is like walking the path. It's pursuing the goal of purification. Then the combustion, or the burning process in the candle, or the fire part, the light and heat, is the passion, you might say. And there's a funny Greek word, enthusiasm, and the Greek etymology, the beginning of those words is being possessed by a god, or the god within, or divine madness, the enthusiasm. And this is analogous to us as students of Theosophy, our self-devised spiritual efforts. And there's a quote that I don't remember exactly that we banty about self-devised. It's from the Theosophical Tenets, but our self-devised and self-generated efforts. That's our fire, our passion. And then this transformation occurs with the combustion process, and combustion is complete, and the long chain wax, the lower monastic aspect, the body of conditioned existence, is transformed into CO2 and water vapor, the buddhi manas. Again, something more etherealized. It's carbon dioxide gas, so it's not a solid that we can see. And again, it's an analogy going from these very simple physical, again by analogy, simple forms of matter, of solid, liquid, and gas. And water, we see that in its own analogy compared to the candle, of a wax candle, the liquid wax, and then the vapor and the flame. Ice would be, ice is the solid water, liquid water is the liquid water we see, and then the vapor would be steam, and then clouds and whatnot. So we have these ideas of transformations that can occur, and this is the analogy for our personal purification. And so in that transformation of the combustion, the buddhi manas is heading in the direction of the etherealized Purusha. And when one gets back into what one of my friends from Madre Grande Monastery, another theosophical group, he called it the psychic soup. And Blavatsky has a bunch of names for that as well. It's this lower Akashic awareness where a lot of the Akashic stuff, which he was talking about, the lower ether with an E, that more contaminated version of the astral light has all the memories and thoughts of humans, with all the wars and fights and all the negativity and anger and rage and whatnot that is part of our human experience that is in the Akasha. So she warns that it's very dangerous to um, maybe through mediumship to look into the Akashic astral light, the astral light, that lower Akashic area, and because that is very, how shall I put it? it's very materializing. It very much gets you back into the quote personality concerns, which I put in quote. And indeed, in theosophy, we have this distinction between the personality, which would be our lower quaternary, the Shulasura, Lingashura, Kama, Prana, and then the um, individuality, which would be the capital E ego. So Blavatsky, and in the writing, he uses a lot of synonyms, and it's funny, even in the Bhagavad Gita, which we study on Fridays, um, I forget the number, but there's like 26 or 30 different names for Arjuna. They're like nicknames. And then when Krishna's addressing him, he'll call him this thing or that thing, or mighty armed one, or call him the son of his mother, the son of and he calls him all kinds of names. And so we have all these different words to describe the same thing. And it's kind of a funny intellectual, mental, verbal sort of exercise here. So the psychic soup is when we get back, our fires are dimmed, and we're back in our personality concerns, worried about our taxes, worried about the boss at work, driving, etc., etc. And then we're back in our solid wax quaternary form. So I think the candle as an analogy is very, very wonderful. Fire is fascinating. There's an artist that I've seen, his picture is Alex Gray. I've never met him or been to New York. He has I don't know if he's still there or used to be there. There's a museum of his artwork there. And this is a painting of his that I've known for years and years. He made it in the late 80s, I believe. Yeah, 86. It's a fascinating fire picture. And even in Buddhism, Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, talks about the world being a place of fire or a conflagration, and the manifested world is like a house on fire. And so we have all these transformational, consuming energies going on around us, in a sense. And this picture was inspired by Alex Gray, and he wrote a little bit about it. He describes it as theologue is the name of the picture, just one word, theologue. And he describes it as, quote, the union of the human and the divine consciousness, weaving the fabric of space and time in which the self and its surroundings are embedded. So this Alex Gray wrote about his own visionary meditational experience back in the 80s, in which he saw and envisioned, experienced himself in that picture that he then made, and describes it in one of his quotes in his writings, a mystic fire engulfed me. So we're, again, on this theme of the fire of purgation. It's something that I imagine the human consciousness he's talking about, we would refer to probably as the higher manasic, the higher manas, or the buddhimanas, reaching upward towards the divine consciousness. And the COSM is his Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. And like I said, years ago, it was a museum in New York, and I don't know if it's still there or not. Let me carry on a little bit more here with a quick summary of an article that Jonathan shared with me from Theosophy Trust. It's from the Gupta Vidya, and we have on the shelf there the volume 1, 2, 3. They're lectures that have been transcribed and edited from Raghavan Iyer. And this is in volume 1 of the Gupta Vidya, an article called The Fire of Purgation, which is the title of today's talk on the slides that one of our sisters here in the lodge has so graciously created for us. The Fire of Purgation. So it's from the Theosophy Trust website if you wanted to look at the article yourself, and it's called The Fire of Purgation. And in his opening thoughts, he makes a promise, quote, he being Iyer, Raghavan Iyer, the human monad, having arrived at the stage of incipient consciousness of its identity with the Logos, is in effect a psychic embryo, trapped in the matrix of astral matter, but capable of a new birth, that's my words, my typing, into a noetic awareness through the arousal of its Buddhic capacity of intuitive apprehension. So this kind of points to the idea that we can maybe step away for a moment from our five senses of seeing, hearing, touch, taste, smell, those senses, and all the ideas we have about the senses with our personality, and go to another mental capacity of intuition, and using this Buddhic capacity, this intuitive process, and then we would be capable going from our psychic embryo state to I capitalize the words, the new birth And that's, I think, part of this idea of the purification. So the lower, in that kind of perplexing article at the beginning, or quote at the beginning, about the ether with an A and the ether with an E from Blavatsky, the lower ether is analogous to the astral light, which is another phraseology. So Arun Iyer, Raghavan Iyer, sees the astral light as an impediment to advancement. That's that psychic soup I was talking about. And it's the collection of many thoughts, which include the predominant old, selfish, and personality-focused thoughts. And through the energies, I'm sorry, thought energy is a phrase that Iyer uses in this article. Thought energy, he advises, are to use the, he says, what we should do is we should use the noetic science of generation, transmission, and application of thought energies. So he postulates that there's a noetic science that involves the use of thought energy. And he describes it in electromagnetic ways. And this is a new slide. You've shown something like this in another Aquarian series, but it basically talks about photons and electromagnetic radiation. And so the one that we see is this little narrow thing where the light bulb is in the middle of our visible light that we see with our physical eyes. And indeed, in Hinduism, we talk about the objects of sense, like our eyes, ears, tongue for tasting, and the organs of sense and the objects of sense, and how they're kind of mixed together. So we have this visible spectrum of light that we're familiar with, but the photons do all kinds of things, not just visible light. And we have the ultraviolet, the infrared that we're familiar with, X-rays. When you go to the doctor, you get an X-ray of a broken bone or something. Then there's gamma rays at the far end when you get into radioactive elements and other more high energy. So the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy that's contained with those photons. So the photons have more energy at the gamma ray level, and then our light level has just enough energy that we can see with our eyes, and that is another chemical reaction between the photons and the um, I think they're called rhodopsins. Going through my biochemistry. So there's three major ones, and they change physically. The molecules change the shape when photons of light hit them at different wavelengths of light, and then our brain interprets them as colors. So we kind of make up a story. That's the matrix of physical reality that we're caught up in. And then you go past infrared, your TV remote control, radar, TV, FM radio, AM radio, and then it goes on and on. And there are radio astronomers that sometimes look at really, really big wavelengths that have very low energy. And that's something that they can do. And here it's comparing the size. So the size of the wavelength, which is that little sine wave going up and down, would be the size of an atom, 10 nanometers, a tenth of a centimeter, 1 centimeter for radar, like in the military using radars. And then the AM, those wavelengths are like the size of a building. They're 100 meters, really big. Now back to this theosophy ideas and the astral light, this lower, you might say, lower level of reality, you might call it. So again, he sees this as an impediment to our advancement. And I went backwards. So we talk about astral light as an impediment, the spectrum, and then in this article, Iyer talks about physical electromagnetic communication as an analogy, and that he says that what we're looking at in that physical world, like in that slide I just showed you guys, it's, quote, but a material reflection of capabilities and laws inhering in consciousness. So this is a big leap, going from the physical things we're familiar with, the lights, the Wi-Fi to get myself connected to the laptop here, connected to you guys on the internet. All of these things are a material, in our material world, a reflection of laws and capabilities in consciousness. So this is a really fascinating doctrinal statement. And so that part of that doctrine is that thought waves exist. And some people believe this. Some modern scientists say there's no way to test this. We don't believe thought waves exist. But a lot of people do, and I am in the ones that have the strong opinion that it's a very valid hypothesis that thought waves exist. And one example is ancient Chinese practices of Qigong. And back in the 80s, Bill Moyer did a TV show, and a bunch of doctors from Harvard went to China and then it wrote a book called Healing in the Mind. And they looked at these Harvard MD people looked at the Qigong Chinese practitioners that would stand in the room of a sick person and just kind of emit some energy towards them, probably thought wave energies, that would have a healing effect on the Chinese patient. So it's like, what's all this about? So that was about 40 years ago. That's been aware of by people at Harvard. And so the idea is like, there is a chink in the armor. We're beginning to open up in modern Western science and physiology to this idea that there are thought waves. And here in Theosophy, we talk about sound or vak. That's a big thing. Logos, Greek word. It's sound, word, vak. And for me, sound is like waves and vibrations, back to those sine waves of the photons of light. So they're all analogous in some way. And HPB writes about sound and harmony. Oh, I got a typo in here. A quote from Blavatsky. Physical man is the musical instrument, or Shula Sarira. And the ego, that higher triad, the ego is the performing artist. The potentiality of a perfect melody of sound is in the former, the instrument, and no skill of the latter can awaken a faultless harmony out of a broken or badly made instrument. This harmony depends on the fidelity of transmission by word or act to the objective plane of the unbroken divine thought in the very depths of man's subjective or inner nature. Physical man may, to follow our simile, be a priceless Stradivarius or a cheap cracked fiddle, or again, a mediocrity between the two in the hands of the Paganini who ensouls him. And so the goal of the student, as we kind of wind up on Raghavan's article, the goal of the student or the neophyte or the chela to be is self-purification, which is acquiring virtues. And in the Voice of the Silence, we talk about the Buddhist paramitas, and there's 6 or 7 or 10, depending on who you're looking at in the Buddhist world. And there are various virtues. Generosity is the first one, dana paramita. Viraga is one we talk about a lot, which is indifference to pain and pleasure. And then studying sacred texts, as we do here in our kind of bookish theosophy world. Avoiding toxins is another thing. So there's the positive acquiring, and then there's avoiding stuff, avoiding toxins, poisons in your diet, toxic thoughts, habits, addictions, or furies, which are kind of emotional, losing emotional control. And then the goal then would be to become the self-governed sage, moving in that direction. This allows the student to vibrate more and more in alignment with the masters, with the adepts. And one word, to put it all into one word, of our responsibility as students in this path is purification. So the goal today, the Fires of Purgation, is really kind of our main goal here. And so Raghavan writes, individuals could become neophytes at some level if they would come into proper magnetic alignment with those true disciples hidden in their midst. And Raghavan writes that in his days, 1975 and thereabouts, he states that there are a number of Nirmanakayas, Bodhisattvas, and adepts that have actually incarnated on Earth, and they're hanging around with us. But they're extremely reticent, very secretive, kind of private, and they don't advertise who they are. But they're there. And so our goal is to do magnetic alignment. I see I misspelled that typo. And this magnetic alignment is on the causal plane of the noetic mind. And he ends up with the mark of becoming a lighter human being is to be able to gaze at the stars with gratitude and to show love for all beings, like the Buddhist idea of all sentient beings, transmission of merit, and, quote, to become a co-worker with nature. And getting closer to the guru, every one of us, these incarnated Nirmanakayas and others, every human being, according to his consciousness of time, emits a certain mental vibration. Again, back to those thought waves. In our aura, we have a mental vibration. And the goal here is for one to get closer and closer to the level of noetic consciousness. That would be the flame and the liquid wax of the candle to be more etherealized. The goal for this life or future lives is to keep striving. And Raghavan writes that, well, maybe in this lifetime you're not quite ready to be a chela, and that's okay. and you can devote yourself to supporting other chelas and students and whatnot, and just keep striving. And this may take lifetime after lifetime. And one draws closer to the Akashic fires of true rejuvenation in this process. And the Akashic fires are well known to the adept, and quote, they may be viewed by us as the neophyte as the fires of purification, purgation, and resolve. So Raghavan Iyer ends the article by saying, quote, start afresh without illusions or expectations. So thank you all for that presentation on the fires of purgation, baptism, purification, and Raghavan article.
Thank you so much, Ken, for taking us through the fires of purgation, baptism, and I didn't know much about or anything about the cult of Cybele. Is that what?
Yeah, Cybele, the goddess. Yeah.
Okay, didn't know anything about that one, so that was really, really interesting. Trying to imagine the butchering of a bull.
Yeah, big animal, a bull.
Okay, and blood coming down through the pores of this board and being drenched in that blood, and that was some form of purgation
Purification and a rebirth
and rebirth.
into eternal life. Yeah.
Okay, that was really interesting. But I absolutely enjoyed your analogy with the candle. I kept thinking with the same cycle that we have with vapor turning to rain and informing the soil and then returning to vapor. Yeah, it was very eye-opening. Thank you for that. I also wanted to know if we could make also a connection between purgation or purification and the Kamaloka, or not so much the Kamaloka, but the
Devachan?
yuga that we are in right now.
Oh, yes.
Right. I'm wondering if fire could, or this idea of purgation could also be connected with just the intensity of the molecules moving, being in this very intense part of the cycle, the main cycle.
Absolutely. And even though we can look at positive aspects of the Kali Yuga, but I think Blavatsky in one of these quotes talks about it as a very harsh time for the soul to be in this uh, in this in this time.
Mhm.
Let me see if I find that quote again real quick here.
It's almost pressurized in a way.
Yeah, that we're baptized through matter, and that that original state is perhaps somewhat difficult.
Right.
It's arduous, and of course, our goal then is not to give up, and really to allow ourselves to go through that process of even in the voice of the silence. There's this talk about killing the lunar form. In a sense, you might say that's like the materialized solid wax form of us as humans in the lower quaternary, and that just changes completely into carbon dioxide and water. So
That's
it's
great.
transformed. It's no longer sort of like a caterpillar going to a butterfly. The caterpillar is gone.
Well, nature is just, when we can consider nature is not just intelligent, it's the source of all intelligence, that this balance takes place. It's really amazing. But I love the fact that we started with gratitude and you ended with gratitude. You know, and I don't know that that was by design, but it
Oh no, it's really important, I think. Yeah.
yeah, to have gratitude for this whole process,
Hmm.
even though we may be suffering, and I'm sure we do go through episodes of suffering it, but especially during this particular yuga, to have appreciation for the fact that we are given this opportunity to have this pressurized learning process, as painful as it may be, you know.
And in the Alcoholics Anonymous psychiatry, part of our substance use disorder training, the AA world does involve uh, people emerging from their addiction, having quote hit bottom, so their house is on fire, you might say.
Mhm.
Everything is bad and terrible, and then they want to get sober and stop drinking alcohol or whatever drug they were using. A lot of times, the sponsor will recommend to the new person to write a gratitude list every day,
Yeah.
just to kind of change their mindset from I'm the victim and my house is on fire and I've lost this and lost that. My wife left me. My wife has left me. My cat's dead. You know, all these bad things that happened. Had a car accident, totaled my car, and then what to be grateful for? I'm alive. I haven't broken my legs. And so you can look at gratitude. Very
I think it
important.
really helps to put things in perspective, especially if a person is feeling very weighed down. Judy's got her hand up.
Well, yes, just a brief comment and a question. You spoke about um, being baptized in a sense by being inserted into matter. And in that way, I guess we're all crucified and we all have to bear the cross. And we have to realize that no one can do it for us, no God or other human being. And so there's a sense of why do we have to go through this? Are we sacrificing ourselves to weaker selves? And why have these weaker cells gone into such a state that we have to help them? But we, of course, know that we do, so that all humans can rise to a higher level of consciousness. So I know that's a huge question, but
Mhm.
what you said about purgation brought that up. I mean, there's, baptism by being inserted into matter, baptism by fire, baptism by water, baptism in every sense of the word. You know,
Most definitely. And yeah, thank you for those comments and thoughts and questions. I'll put on the slide here the HPB quote about that spirit or our monad has to
yeah,
pass through the ordeal. So we're back to that, AA hitting bottom, the Kali Yuga, the ordeal of incarnation and life. So it's being baptized with matter. And again, like in that obligatory pilgrimage through the races and rounds, we go from the etherealized spirit and then gaining what HPB writes here. Um, uh, the monad or the spirit, can return to the original state of homogeneity of primal essence only through the addition of the fruitage of karma. Uh, and so I think that idea of the fruitage of karma, let me stop sharing there, is this idea of the baptism through material existence and all of the ups and downs, and now, as Desiree was saying, the Kali Yuga. And that the idea of the Bodhisattva vow is that the Nirmanakaya and on the spiritual path, part of our goal is to help other students, and then for the masters and the adepts, part of their goal is to help the would-be chela, the neophytes. And so there's this whole idea of, as you said, Judy, to raise up consciousness of mankind, and that through this fruitage of karma, funny language, but I think it means the living life, having experiences, the ups and downs. Like I said about the AA person, getting drunk and totaling your car, or et cetera, losing your mortgage, all these physical realities that happen. And then we have this, I forget the name of the rabbi who wrote it, when bad things happen to good people. So clearly, as students, we imagine ourselves as good people, our personality, but yet, life happens and there are the downturns. And that's the ordeal, I think, of incarnation into matter that Blavatsky's writing about. So indeed, it is part of our necessary requirement to gain that experience, that monadic experience in the obligatory pilgrimage, and then return back in the more etherealized form, like the adept, and then eventually to become the bodhisattva, like in the little statue behind me here. Uh, and then our goal is to be compassionate to all sentient beings and to relieve them of the suffering of conditioned existence.
That's great.
Is he David Grossman?
Oh, hi, David.
Hi there. Hey, Ken, thanks a lot. That talk, that area you showed, those slides of the magnetic spectrum, from the low wavelength reds to the high ultraviolets and stuff. It reminded me of HPB. She spoke highly of the practice of mesmerism.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could say anything about that, about magnetic healing, and I don't hear much about it in theosophical circles these days, but she spoke very highly of it, and worth cultivating that type of healing. Maybe in some new age groups today, people are kind of into that, but I just wondered if you could say anything about that.
Mhm.
That
Well,
idea of healing that way.
yes, the idea of this so-called energy healing is a broader umbrella. Mesmerism would be, a subset of that from the French guy Antoine Mesmer and hypnotism. But I think the larger umbrella is the idea that thought form energy, again with this hypothesis, and again it's a doctrinal hypothesis that we do have thought forms, thought energies, and even in Tibetan lore, there's the idea of the of tulkus, entities that are created in the astral world that can sometimes materialize in the physical world, that are thought form entities. And then we have in Hinduism the Mayavi Rupa of the adept, where they can project an image of their body that another person might actually see. So, given that we have this thought form idea and this auric energy, I believe that it's not just New Age, and indeed, as our Western medical and physical science and whatnot advances and becomes more spiritualized, we may be able to look more carefully at and to understand the old Chinese healing of the Qigong I was talking about
Yeah,
with
it's
Bill
similar,
Moyers in the
right?
mind. And that is ancient. It's been going on for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. I don't know the actual history in China. I know there are some of the herbs in Chinese herbalism that are considered to be special herbs that have been used for over 1,000 years in Chinese herbal healing. But connected to those herbs and then this person to person Qigong thing is the idea of an energetic field that can heal another person in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know a lot about Qigong, but I know a little bit from Bill Moyers in this old ancient book from the 80s.
You remind me then too that in terms of just regular science, it's pretty interesting, the breakthrough we've had with the MRI technology. That's kind of moving in that direction to.
Absolutely. There's MRIs and then functional MRIs. And then there also are, that's for diagnostic purposes.
Right,
And then
right.
in the psychiatry world, there's treatment purposes using transcranial magnetic stimulation.
Wow.
And the machines, I think there's a couple of guys here in San Diego County who have them. They cost about $80,000, these machines. But basically, if you get a person with major depressive disorder, you can expose them to these magnetic fields, and it does something to their brain and their brain chemistry and their brain anatomy that helps to relieve the major depressive symptoms. And there's also folks using pulsed electromagnetic frequency treatment. I know certainly in bone healing, it has over 10 years of modern Western European and American studies from orthopedists who have able to take a broken bone, expose it to 15 minutes at a time, a couple times a day of pulsed electromagnetic frequency at certain frequency levels, and that enhances bone healing compared to someone that's healing without the PEMF.
Wow.
So our modern technology and modern medicine is moving in this more etherealized direction.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. Interesting. Yeah.
That's great. I know you made an analogy there with the candle, and I'm wondering, since you brought up the frequencies, what can we say about, let's say, the long wave frequency radio waves? What are the advantages of having long wave? I can think of the short wave because the short wave is fidelity, but it doesn't go as far, distance wise, right? The sound is clearer. So we could say, if we're talking about maybe just a human experience, the sound is much more clear with a higher frequency, but it's short wave. I wonder if you can just make some kind of analogy between human thought forms, what we can do in long wave and what we can do in short wave. Because when I think about concentration and true fidelity, meaning the individual and their will is so precise and so direct, it's completely unperturbed by any other vibration. That's what I feel that fidelity gives us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But there has to be something that a long wave also gives us. I'm just wondering, when we're in this psychic soup, you called it, is there something about the long wave that really benefits us?
Actually, yeah, the long wave, say in radio astronomy, I was showing you that little graphic picture, waves that are about the size of a tall building. There actually are also waves that are the size of the diameter of the Earth about. And so there'll be radio telescope people at the same moment in time looking for waves, say in Australia and in London or England. So they're on opposite sides of the planet, thousands of miles apart, and the wave is that big. And those radio waves from radio astronomy can look at things that are further away in time and space. So even though they're weaker energy, they do travel, and so that's one purpose. And then there's a weird thing I've heard of in terms of radio astronomy, doing observations, and it involves a lot of mathematical calculations and correlations. Doing observations at one season of the year when the Earth is on one side of the sun, and then at another season of the year when the Earth is on the other side of the sun, there actually are photon waves that are as big as the orbit of the Earth.
Yeah.
So there's some really big waves, and they're just photons, like the light that we're seeing here. The idea of being able to isolate yourself from extraneous photons in the psychic soup, I think, is very important. And I mentioned that I had looked at a YouTube lecture from the Theosophical Society in America, and this fellow was talking about purification, how it's necessary for the student to become purified in our aura, so that we can be able to resonate with the adept or the Mahatma. And he drew an analogy that if we're not purified, it's like us as an everyday person trying to talk to someone who is really inebriated and drunk on alcohol. They're not making any sense. They may be slurring their speech, don't understand what they're saying. They're illogical. And so for the adept at their higher purified vibrational level, the ordinary human being who's not even attempting baptism or purification or any of those things is going to be like, in analogy, like to us, the alcoholic who's slurring his speech and not making any sense. So it's something that the adept, in a sense, has to kind of protect themselves from that, and have boundaries and barriers and gates and things like that. And that only when the chela or the student, the chela to be or the neophyte, has achieved through our own aspirational work, through our own combustion of the candle flame, that we have achieved enough degree of vibrational purification for the time being, for the adept even to be able to see us or to recognize us or to be able to interact with us. And that realizing that at any moment we can cool down again and become solid wax if we let go of our aspirations and do things that are, say, have a rage attack or get really drunk on alcohol or something like that. We've descended back into the lower levels. So I think those are analogies of thought and behavior, thought waves and emanations in our, quote, aura, which is a word that Blavatsky didn't use here. That would be in alignment, sort of like you might say, with the higher vibrational photons, the gamma rays, you might say, versus the lower energy, lower vibrational radio telescope vibrations that might be more difficult for the adept or the master, the Mahatma, to be able to recognize us.
Mhm.
And again, I think it's interesting that in this article from Theosophy Trust, Iyer says that this physical analogy is only a reflection of something else at a noetic level of conscious thought. And for me, that's intriguing because I'm very much stuck in the physical reality. But it's like, oh wait, there's something else. This is only a reflection of something. And
Mhm.
and for reflections, I think of the Star of David, with the two interlaced triangles. One's coming from above, one's coming from below, and they're like a reflection of each other, the two triangles. So our physical reality and all these MRIs and all this other stuff is a reflection of something else.
Well, think of a computer. Now, think of the complexity of a computer. It starts out with zeros and ones, duality. And as it triangulates and goes through its circuitry, it ends up reflecting to us on the monitor everything that all of our thoughts. I mean, that construction itself has to be a reflection of what's going on in nature. In my
Absolutely.
mind, it was like we manifest it in the we have to have brought it down somehow, but it's, to me, it's just a reflection of that archetype, um, in a really beautiful way, actually. Of course, how we use it is one thing,
Yes, the
but it's still a
intentionality is,
reflection, you know.
yeah, the intentionality is so very important. So very important. Yes.
Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation, Ken, once again. Um, Thanks everyone for being here. It's about that time to let everybody go, and appreciate you all being here, and I hope to see you again next week.